My name is Sienna Hawthorne. I'm 39 years old, and for almost 15 years, I believed one simple thing. If I stayed useful, my family would always save a place for me. Seriously, I organized birthdays, found last-minute hotels, fixed everyone's travel, disasters remembered every anniversary, and somehow became the unofficial problem solver for the entire family. Guess what? I never minded, because every thank you felt like love. At least, that's what I told myself then. My younger brother, Mason, announced he was getting married at a luxury vineyard resort outside Napa Valley, California, and everyone acted like it was the event of the decade. My mom cried. My dad opened an expensive bottle of wine he'd been saving for years. Even I was excited, because after everything we'd been through, I thought this wedding would finally bring our family closer. Boy, was I wrong looking back now. I should have noticed the little signs, the private family group chats that suddenly went quiet whenever I walked into the room, the awkward smiles whenever I asked about travel plans, the way my sister -law-to-b, Vanessa, always changed the subject whenever I mentioned flights. But hey, I figured they were just stressed. Wedding planning is crazy, right? That's what everyone kept saying, so I kept helping. I built spreadsheets, compared hotel rates, coordinated guest schedules, and even helped relatives from 3 different states book their vacations. No way was I gonna let my brother's big day fall apart. Not on my watch. Then, exactly 16 days before the ceremony, I stopped by my parents' house carrying a folder full of updated travel confirmations. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table staring into her coffee. My dad looked strangely quiet. I laughed and asked what was going on, thinking maybe somebody forgot to pack or lost an ID. Instead, my mom looked at me with the saddest smile I'd seen in years and whispered, "Honey, we don't have any flight information yet." I frowned, thinking it had to be some booking delay. Come on, that happens all the time. I pulled out my laptop and searched every confirmation number I'd been given. Nothing. My parents' names weren't attached to a single reservation. My stomach tightened. I checked again, slower, still nothing. That's when I called Vanessa, expecting a simple explanation. She answered on the second ring, laughing like she was at brunch with friends when I asked about my parents' flights. There was a short pause, then she actually chuckled and said, "Forget the flight. They can watch the wedding pictures online." For a second, I couldn't even breathe. My fingers went numb. My heart pounded so hard, I honestly thought I was hearing things. I froze, then quietly answered, "Okay." "Understood." She laughed one more time before hanging up, believing she'd won. What she didn't know was that those 2 quiet words had just started a countdown. None of them saw coming. I wish I could tell you I immediately called my brother and everything got sorted out, but nope, life doesn't work like that. I spent the next hour trying to convince myself there had to be some stupid misunderstanding. You gotta be kidding me, right? Mason would never let our parents get pushed aside like that. He wasn't perfect, but he had a good heart, so I called him straight to voicemail. I texted nothing. I tried again 2 hours later, still nothing. Then I remembered Vanessa had planned one of those luxury digital detox retreats before the wedding. Phones off. No outside contact, just yoga, wine tastings, and relationship coaching. Seriously, who disappears 16 days before their own wedding? I drove over to my parents' house that evening, pretending everything was fine because I still believed I could fix it. Dad was polishing the same old leather shoes he'd worn to every important family event for almost 20 years. Mom had already packed her navy blue dress inside a garment bag hanging by the front door. They both smiled when I walked in. And Dad joked, "Did they finally send those boarding passes, kiddo?" My throat tightened, but I forced a smile and lied, saying I was still checking a few things. The truth is, I couldn't bear to destroy their excitement. Not yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something kept bothering me, so I opened the shared wedding planning folder Vanessa had given me months earlier. Most of the files were still there: seating charts, vendor contracts, guest schedules, even limousine assignments. But one folder had suddenly been password protected, the travel folder. My stomach dropped. Why hide travel information from the person organizing half the wedding? Come on. That made 0 sense. The next morning, I called the luxury resort in Napa, pretending I needed to confirm my parents' arrival time. The receptionist was sweet, but after checking the guest manifest, she politely said, "Ma'am, I don't see Frank or Linda Hawthorne listed anywhere." My heart skipped. Wait, what? She checked again, slower this time. Nope, no room reservation, no airport shuttle, no dinner seating, nothing. It was like my parents had never been invited at all. That's when every little red flag from the past few months slammed together inside my head. Vanessa constantly changing. Subjects: the secret group chats, Mason never answering travel questions. The awkward looks during family dinners. This wasn't a mistake. This had been planned weeks ago, maybe months. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. For the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't dealing with poor planning. I was dealing with people who had quietly erased my parents from their own son's wedding. Then something even stranger happened. My phone buzzed. It wasn't Mason. It wasn't Vanessa. It was the wedding's private event coordinator, and the first sentence out of her mouth made every hair on my arms stand up. She whispered, "Ms. Hawthorne, I think there's something you deserve to know, but you didn't hear it from me." I stepped outside before answering because something in her voice told me this wasn't just another wedding problem. The coordinator sounded nervous, almost like she was looking over her shoulder. "Ms. Hawthorne," she whispered, "I shouldn't be calling you, but I saw your parents' names on the original guest manifest 6 weeks ago. Yesterday, they disappeared." I stopped breathing. "What do you mean, disappeared?" She hesitated before saying something. "I'll never forget someone personally instructed us to remove them and replace those seats with 2 corporate investors from San Francisco." My jaw literally dropped. Investors? Seriously. This wasn't about limited seating. This was about appearances. She apologized again, then quietly added, "Your brother has no idea he's been kept completely out of the planning meetings." The line went dead. I sat in my car, staring through the windshield for almost 10 minutes, trying to process what I'd just heard. Then I did what I've always done when things didn't make sense. I started connecting the dots. Vanessa's wealthy parents owned several luxury hotels across California. The wedding wasn't just a wedding anymore. It was a networking event. Every table was filled with CEOs, investors, local politicians, and business partners. My parents weren't rich. They were retired public school teachers who drove a 12-year-old SUV and still clipped grocery coupons to Vanessa's family. They didn't fit the picture. Suddenly, every strange moment over the last year made perfect sense. The expensive engagement photos where my parents barely appeared. The seating chart Vanessa refused to show anyone, the guest list that kept changing. Heck, this whole thing had been planned from the very beginning. I almost called Mason again, but something told me not to. If he really didn't know, then somebody had carefully built a lie around him. And if I exploded now, he'd probably believe them instead of me. So instead, I quietly drove to my parents' house carrying their favorite takeout barbecue like it was just another Friday night. We laughed and we watched an old baseball game. Dad talked about how proud he was that his son was finally getting married. Mom kept asking whether Napa would be chilly in the evenings because she didn't want to pack the wrong sweater. Every sentence they spoke felt like another knife in my chest. I couldn't tell them not yet. When I got home close to midnight, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't the coordinator. It was an email forwarded anonymously. There was no message attached, just one PDF. I opened it and nearly dropped my laptop. It was the original seating chart dated over a month earlier. My parents' names were right there at the family table beside Mason. Then someone had marked both names with a bold red X and handwritten 2 words beside them, "Replace immediately." My hand started shaking because below that note was a signature I'd never expected to see. It wasn't Vanessa's. It wasn't her mother's either. It belonged to someone in my own family, and in that exact moment, I realized the betrayal ran far deeper than I had ever imagined. I stared at that signature for what felt like forever because it belonged to my Aunt Rebecca, my dad's older sister, the one person everyone trusted with every family plan. She had been acting as the unofficial go-between for both families during the wedding, and somehow she'd helped erase my own parents from the biggest day of my brother's life. No way. I wasn't about to start a screaming match over a couple of screenshots. I wanted the truth to speak for itself. The next morning, Mason, finally, called me from the airport sounding exhausted. "Hey sis, what's going on, everybody? Keep saying you're upset." I took a deep breath, remembering something my dad always said: facts first, feelings later. So I calmly told him everything: the missing flights, the resort confirmation, the anonymous seating chart, and finally, I texted him the PDF with Aunt Rebecca's signature. There was complete silence for almost 30 seconds, then he quietly asked one question: "Are Mom and Dad really not coming?" I answered. "They were never given the chance." He hung up without another word. Wedding day arrived and social media exploded with pictures of luxury cars, champagne towers, and celebrities walking into the vineyard. I stayed home with my parents, pretending it was just another Saturday. We grilled burgers in the backyard. Dad played old country songs while Mom tried smiling through the hurt. Around noon, my phone started buzzing nonstop. First Aunt Rebecca, then Vanessa, then 3 unknown numbers I ignored. Every single one. About an hour later, Mason called again. His voice sounded different, calm, but completely shattered. "Sis, they lied to me." Turns out he'd asked the resort manager to see the original guest records before the ceremony, and within minutes, the entire story fell apart. The coordinator confirmed my parents had been removed weeks earlier at the request of Vanessa's family, with Aunt Rebecca acting as the family representative. Mason looked straight at Vanessa and asked one simple question: why were my parents replaced? She tried blaming budget, then seating limits, then called it a misunderstanding. But every excuse collapsed because the documents were sitting right there in front of everyone, including several investors she'd been trying so hard to impress. Guess what? My brother never walked down that aisle. He took off his jacket, handed Vanessa the ring box, and quietly said, "If my parents don't deserve a seat at my wedding, then neither do I." Then he walked out. The guests were left sitting in complete silence, while photographers lowered their cameras and the luxury reception turned into the most expensive canceled event anyone at that vineyard had ever seen that evening, instead of standing beneath crystal chandeliers. My brother showed up at our parents' backyard, still wearing his dress shirt, carrying nothing but a small overnight bag. Mom burst into tears. Dad hugged him without saying a single word, and Mason looked at both of them with tears in his eyes, saying, "I'm sorry, I believed the picture instead of the people. We ate burgers on paper plates, laughed under cheap string lights, and somehow that tiny backyard felt more beautiful than any luxury venue ever could." A few months later, Mason married his best friend from college in a quiet ceremony at a local lakeside park with fewer than 40 guests. My parents sat proudly in the very front row, and this time nobody had to earn their seat, because real family doesn't compete for appearances, it simply shows up. Looking back, I finally understand something that changed my life forever. Sometimes the people laughing while telling you to forget the flight have already forgotten what family really means. And the moment you stop chasing their invitation is the moment you finally find your own place at the table.